Two places today, a few kilometers apart, and both of them are about water coming out of rock. One is a spring that has never stopped running and has never frozen, and that people have fought over, in court and in the street, for the last 30 years. The other is a waterfall that is famous all over the world because of a poem written by a man who never came here. Both are Dakota places first. We are in Minneapolis, Minnesota, on the west bank of the Mississippi River, just above the point where the Minnesota River joins it. That junction is a few kilometers south of this trail, and it is not just a confluence. In the Dakota language, it is Bdote, where two waters come together, and for many Dakota people, it is the center of the world and the place of creation. That has to be said first, because everything else we look at today sits on top of it. This is not empty ground that acquired meaning when Europeans arrived. The Dakota are here now, in this state, in communities that include the Mendota Mdewakanton, Shakopee Mdewakanton, Prairie Island, Lower Sioux, and Upper Sioux. When we talk about this landscape, we are talking about a homeland that is still occupied by the people whose homeland it is. Now look at the shape of the ground, because it explains almost everything. The Minnesota River is a modest river running through an enormous valley, far too large for it. That valley was cut by something else. When the great glacial lake to the northwest, Lake Agassiz, burst out about 13,000 years ago, it sent a torrent down this way that geologists call Glacial River Warren, and it cut a gorge kilometers wide. When River Warren finally drained away, it left the Mississippi and every small creek in the district hanging high above a valley floor that had been scoured out from under them. Water arriving at that edge had nowhere to go but straight down. That is why this corner of Minnesota has waterfalls at all, in a landscape that is otherwise almost completely flat. They are all children of that one flood. And underneath us is a very particular stack of rock, laid down in warm shallow seas roughly 450 to 500 million years ago. On top, a hard gray limestone called the Platteville. Below it, a soft crumbly Decorah shale. And below that, the St. Peter sandstone, which is a nearly pure white quartz sand, so weakly cemented that you can rub it apart between your fingers. Water that falls on this ground soaks down through the soil until it hits that layer cake and then travels sideways along it. Where the layers are cut open at a bluff, the water comes out. That is a spring, and there is one just here. Its Dakota name is Mni Owe Sni. In English it is called Coldwater Spring, and it has been running out of this hillside for a very long time. It puts out something on the order of 144,000 gallons a day, at about 8 degrees Celsius, year-round. It does not freeze. In a Minnesota winter, that is not a small thing. It is a place of reliable, clean, permanent water in a landscape that spends 5 months of the year locked under ice, and people have known that for thousands of years. This is a sacred place for the Dakota, and it is also a place where Dakota, Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, and Iowa people met, gathered, and held ceremony. That is not folklore. In 2023, the site was formally listed on the National Register of Historic Places as a traditional cultural place. It remains in use. People come here to pray. That has never stopped through everything that follows. In 1820, the United States Army arrived at the confluence to build a fort, and the reason they camped at this exact spot was the water. Camp Coldwater was the soldiers' encampment from 1820 to 1825, while they built Fort Snelling on the bluff above the rivers. The springs supplied the fort with drinking water for decades afterward, and in the 1880s, the Army built a formal springhouse and reservoir here. Fort Snelling sits above Bdote, and its purpose was to project American power into a territory that was not American. It is also the place where, after the War of 1862, roughly 1,600 Dakota people, mostly women, children, and elders, were held in a fenced internment camp through the winter below the fort. Something close to 300 of them died there. That happened within sight of this ground. The stone springhouse from the 1880s is still standing here, and the reservoir with it. It is a strange object to walk up to. It is a piece of military plumbing built directly on top of a sacred site, which is, in a single structure, most of the history of this continent. The water still runs out of it, into a pool, and then away downhill toward the river. After the Second World War, the fort's land was broken up, and this piece of it went to the United States Bureau of Mines. For over 40 years, the ground we are looking at was the Twin Cities Research Center, a fenced federal campus of laboratories and offices. They did real work here, including research into the air filtration that reduced black lung disease among coal miners. The center closed in 1996. Picture what was standing on this grass. A dozen mid-century government buildings, parking lots, chain-link fence, security gates. The spring still ran, underneath all of it, into a culvert. For most of the 20th century, one of the most significant indigenous sites in Minnesota was inside a locked federal facility. And to a great many people in this city, it simply was not there. Then in 1998, the State Transport Department proposed to reroute Highway 55 through the land immediately beside the spring. The plan threatened two things at once. It threatened the underground flow that feeds the spring itself, and it threatened a stand of bur oaks standing directly on the route, which Dakota people held to be sacred. And this time, people put their bodies in the way. What followed became one of the defining environmental and indigenous rights confrontations in the history of this state. They called it the Minnehaha Free State. Protesters, Dakota people, and non-Dakota allies together occupied the proposed route for months at a stretch. At first they squatted in a row of condemned houses that the highway department had already bought and emptied. When those houses were raided and destroyed, the camp moved to the oaks and settled in around them. Some people climbed the trees and simply stayed up there. It went on and off, for well over a year. In December of 1998, in a pre-dawn operation, several hundred law enforcement officers moved in and cleared the camp. It was one of the largest police actions the Twin Cities had seen. The highway was built anyway. The trees came down, and by any simple accounting of who got what they wanted, the protest lost, and lost badly. But that is not actually how the story ended, and the ground we are moving across right now is the evidence of it. In 2001, the Minnesota legislature passed a law protecting the flow of Coldwater Spring, restricting how deep the highway work could dig. To honor it, the state welded an enormous multi-layer synthetic liner beneath the new interchange, tens of thousands of square yards of it, specifically to keep water moving to the spring. That was a national first, and it exists because people sat in trees. Then, in 2010, the whole Bureau of Mines property was transferred to the National Park Service, and it became part of the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area. And the Park Service did something with it that federal agencies almost never do. They took the buildings down, not some of them, all of them. They demolished the entire research campus, broke up and hauled away the parking lots, and started again from bare dirt. The target is Oak Savanna, the landscape that was here before any of this. Scattered bur oaks, standing in prairie grass, sky between the crowns. It is one of the most endangered habitats in North America because it is the easiest to plow and the easiest to let grow into brush. The site reopened to the public in 2012, and the restoration has been running ever since. Restoration on this scale is unglamorous. Cut and treat buckthorn, pull garlic mustard, seed native grasses and forbs, then burn, then seed again. Wait. Watch which species take and which fail. It will look scruffy for years, and it did. What you are looking at now is roughly 15 years of that patient, repetitive, deeply unphotogenic work, and it is beginning to look like something. And the point is not scenery. This is a site where Dakota people are again able to come to a spring, in the open, on land that is not fenced, and use it. The Park Service now works with Dakota communities on how the place is managed. That is a very different sentence from the one you could have written about this ground in 1990. So we leave the spring and head north along the bluff, and within a couple of kilometers the ground begins to change. A creek appears on our left, coming in from the west out of the suburbs. It is small and clear, and running fast over a bed of gravel and limestone slabs. It looks entirely ordinary. It does not look like a creek that is about to do anything remarkable at all. It has roughly a kilometer left before it does. Minnehaha Creek starts at Lake Minnetonka, west of the city, and runs roughly 35 kilometers east across the suburbs to the Mississippi. It drains a chain of lakes and wetlands. For most of its length, it is a slow, mild, meandering thing that you could wade across. And then it reaches the edge of the old River Warren Gorge, and the floor drops out from under it. Minnehaha falls, roughly 16 meters straight down into a green amphitheater of rock and trees in the middle of a city of 400,000 people. In spring, with the snowmelt behind it, it is loud enough that you hear it before you see it. In August, it can be a trickle. In January, it freezes into a hollow cone of ice, and you can walk behind it. Look at the rock face. Hard gray limestone caps the lip. Underneath it, soft shale and softer sandstone. The falling water attacks the weak stuff below and behind, hollowing out a cavity, until the limestone shelf above has nothing left holding it up. Then a slab of it breaks off and crashes into the gorge. The falls move a step upstream. That is the entire mechanism. Which means this waterfall is not standing still and never has been. It is retreating up its own creek, and the wooded gorge below it, littered with fallen limestone blocks, is the trail it has left behind as it went. Every one of those blocks in the creek bed was once the lip that the water poured over. The same process cut the Mississippi Gorge below us, and it is the same process that made St. Anthony Falls in downtown Minneapolis. St. Anthony Falls began far downstream, near what is now downtown St. Paul, and it walked upstream for something like 10,000 years at very roughly 3/4 of a meter a year. When it passed the mouth of Minnehaha Creek, part of the retreat turned up the creek, and that branch is the falls in front of us. They are the same waterfall, split in two. St. Anthony Falls is the reason Minneapolis exists. Every flour mill in the city was built on its power, but it was retreating into soft sandstone, and by the 1860s, it was in real danger of collapsing entirely and destroying the industry that depended on it. So engineers nailed it in place with timber, then with concrete. Today it sits behind an apron and it does not move. Minnehaha Falls was never industrialized in that way, and so it was never frozen in place. It is still working. It is still eating backward, a few centimeters in a good year, into a creek bed that runs west into the suburbs. Given enough time and nobody stopping it, this waterfall will end up somewhere near a shopping center. That is not a joke. That is just arithmetic. Now the name, because the name is wrong. In Dakota, the elements are Mni, meaning water, and Haha, meaning waterfall or curling water. Mnihaha. It means, quite simply, waterfall. The famous translation, Laughing Water, came from a book published in 1849 by Mary Eastman, who was not Dakota and was writing from the outside, and it is not what the word means. It is a pretty mistranslation that has now been repeated for nearly 2 centuries, on signs and maps and school walls. And then in 1855, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow published the Song of Hiawatha, and Minnehaha became the name of its heroine, and overnight this small creek in Minnesota became world famous. It is worth saying plainly what happened next, or rather what did not. Longfellow never came here. He never saw this waterfall or this creek or this state. He worked entirely from other people's writings, including Mary Eastman's and Henry Schoolcraft's, and by most accounts, from a photograph of the falls. The poem is a strange artifact. It made this place a tourist destination almost immediately, and people came by train to see the waterfall from the poem. It also mashed together nations and stories that have nothing to do with each other. Its hero's name is Haudenosaunee from what is now New York. Its setting is Ojibwe. Its heroine is given a Dakota word. It is not a Dakota story. The tourism was enough to save the ground. In 1889, the city of Minneapolis put up $100,000 to buy roughly 173 acres around the falls, and the land became a park. That is a great deal of money for 1889. It is also why this waterfall is not behind a fence today, with a ticket booth in front of it. So this is a Dakota place that the wider world learned about through a poem that got the language wrong, written by a man who never visited, and it was preserved because of the fame that poem gave it. All of that is true at once. Naming it properly costs nothing, and it is a start. Mnihaha, and a few kilometers south, Mni Owe Sni, still running. May is the right month for both. The snowmelt is through the creek, so the falls are loud. The gorge slopes are green and the spring flowers are up before the canopy closes. At the spring, the savanna grasses are pushing through last year's burn. Both places are doing exactly what they have done every May for thousands of years, whatever was built on top of them. A spring is water that has been underground for years, filtered through rock, arriving steady and cold and unchanging. A waterfall is water in a hurry, loud, seasonal, and slowly destroying the ground it falls on. This corner of Minneapolis has both, within a few kilometers of each other, for exactly the same geological reason. The rock under this city is a layer cake, and water finds the weak layer. And people have been fighting over both of them for 2 centuries, over who owns them, who names them, who can pray at them, and whether a road matters more than a spring. Those arguments are not settled, but the water is still coming out of the rock, and the falls are still walking upstream, and both of them will outlast the argument. Thank you for watching. Follow for more trails of the world.